For this episode of Coffee with Closers, I'm sitting down with Brian Barr. Brian is the founder and CEO of Victory Lap, a leading sales education company. He's also a guest lecturer at Northwestern Kellogg School of Management on the topic of B2B sales. Victory Lap Sales Bootcamp has graduated over 1,000 students into sales roles at over 230 companies, including Uber, LinkedIn, Salesforce, Oracle, and many others. Stay tuned for my conversation with Brian, where he shares practical ideas on sales development and leadership.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Coffee with Closers, where business leaders share insights on how to build businesses from the ground up and best practices for innovating in their industry.
Hey, Brian, I'm super excited to have you join me for this episode of Coffee with Closers.
Hey, Sam, great to be here.
Most certainly. Well, obviously, we were kind of introduced to each other by Godard Abel from G2. So obviously, when he makes an introduction, he usually only connects me with people that he knows is a good guest for the show. So I'm super excited. So every entrepreneur has some sort of a story of overcoming obstacles to become an entrepreneur. I'm sure you have some sort of a unique story to share. So can you share with our audience a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey?
Sure. Yeah. For me, it started actually my first job out of school, working for a startup in San Diego, and just it was a really interesting experience to really business. I was a history major, thought I was going to be a teacher and basketball coach, and here I am working for this crazy startup 89 hours in and just feeling the passion and just being 120% in. I was like, this is pretty cool. This isn't like that sort of cubicle corporate structure that I'd always imagined about sort of what the business world looked like. Mm-hmm. And it really started to get my eyes sort of open to the possibilities of and the excitement around taking an idea and building a company, and really bought into that company's and founding story. Fast forward to Groupon, I was there pre-IPO, and it was just in 2010, before the Chicago ecosystem, tech ecosystem was really much of anything. It was like the place to be. And it was just such an amazing time to sort of be part of that rocket ship ride. And I had the opportunity there to sort of do my own sort of entrepreneurial work, where I helped build out and created their sales onboarding department. So originally we just had a few weeks of training and say, hey, new hires, go hit the phones and make some sales. So I wasn't really working that well. So I created we helped build a more of a structured onboarding department and function for that organization. And so I always joke I was an entrepreneur first, and that really opened my eyes to, hey, I guess I do have good ideas and I can execute those ideas. And it gave me the confidence to launch what then became Victory Lap, which I launched that in late 2016. I was VP of sales at an ed tech company. We just raised a Series A. I was with them for a year and a half and sort of helped build things out, but the itch to do my own thing did not go away. I had a big decision to make though, because my wife and I were expecting our first child. So it was in that sort of fork in the road moment of like, keep my good job, reliable salary, or go down to making nothing, when your life becomes a heck of a lot more expensive with kids on the way. And fortunately I had the support of my amazing wife and so forth, and went the route of trying to launch a company, and Victory Lap was born in 2016, a few months after my daughter was born. So, and here we are today, 5 months later. We've grown to over 1,000 individuals who've graduated our sales bootcamp and landed across 600 different companies, everywhere from your G2s to your Salesforces and some of your faster startup growing companies. And we've had the opportunity now to go and do a lot more corporate, sort of work and training and development. And now we're starting to work with some universities as well. So, and we bootstrapped it this entire time. So it's been fun, but, I really have always, just felt that companies and teams are you're at a different sort of level of experience, or in that sort of building phase. And there's something about the unknown, the collaboration that's necessary, the passion that you need to infuse in a product that isn't that built or proven yet, that make that experience, just for me, just something I don't know if I ever see myself doing something ever different again. So.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you took your experience from the learning management software space that you were in, plus the training program that you built at Groupon, combined both of that together, and you made a company out of it, essentially.
Yeah, that's it exactly. And I was also just passionate about it. At Groupon, I was seeing all these individuals who were saying, basically started, I don't know if sales is for me. And then once you train them properly, their, careers sort of took off. And I was like, we can totally do that for more people and frankly, get more companies access to great talent better and faster as well. So I've always been passionate about education as one of the core solutions to sort of fix a lot of maybe societal woes or individual woes. And was really just not just passionate about sort of starting something, but that just really struck to me in my experience of being able to mentor and coach and train others, and wanted to provide that to more people. So
Yeah, and I think what you've done is just kind of formalizing a sales training program that wasn't available in most organizations, right? Because
yeah,
hey, are you interested in selling? Can you be on the phone? Okay, here's the phone and here's the computer. Go sell, right?
yeah,
That was pretty much how it was pretty much done in the past. But nowadays, the sales function is a very highly technical function. Not only you need to be a product specialist, right? You have to understand the customer, the market, the buying journey, all of those things. But then you also have to be an extremely talented person on phone and email and using automation tools. It's a very complicated function to fill these days.
you're leveraging data, right? You need to understand that this is a process. There's a system to follow here, and that system should be adhered to, and it should be optimized constantly. And I always say it's a thinking person's profession. You're constantly critically thinking, trying to tweak this, solve this, overcome this big or small issue for yourself, for your client, etc. You're exactly right. It's a highly, highly, highly skilled profession that is highly also process oriented, which means that you can teach all those things. And by teaching all of those things, you're now demystifying for the profession many people still feel, at least in the entry leveler side of things, that it's, pick up the phone and wing it. Charisma is going to be the reason why I'm successful. And that's, going to be farther from the truth. So you take all those things. It's a highly technical, highly skilled, high integrity profession, right? Oh, by the way, we can teach you all these things, especially given the technology involved that is powering a lot of sales reps jobs today. And if you can combine that by also educating them on mindset and behavior, of which you can pull from experience and top performers, et cetera, you get people to say, heck, I can do this, introvert, extrovert, college degree, no college degree, I can do this. And so that's really what we do.
Mm-hmm.
We build confidence and competencies in individuals from, more traditional or less traditional backgrounds and feed that talent into high growth companies.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that, like you said, you kind of demystify this whole thinking that people have. Oftentimes, most of the people kind of attributed like the charisma and outgoing and extrovert personality being kind of the primary excellence.
Yeah,
that guarantees excellence for a salesperson. But obviously, like from what you've done, right? You've trained and placed almost 1,000 salespeople, so you must have seen all slew of personalities that were able to be trained and placed in companies in Excel.
It's it. Yeah. And just, from my managed experience, firsthand seeing a lot of people succeed in the role, and of course, seeing people sort of blossom in the training program, and then alumni going off and doing great things. It just gives me a lot of confidence to keep going and try to keep doing it for more and more people. So
that's awesome to hear. So what's the biggest lesson you learned in the process of building your company?
Oh gosh, there's so many to count. I don't think that book is written yet, hopefully, where I'm reflecting on all the lessons. I've gone through an interesting experience. I sort of proved it out at one organization, but then built a similar model for sort of the market as a whole. I bootstrapped it, and I've kept it bootstrapped and tried to achieve a level of growth and scale. So for me, my lessons are one is like focus on sort of the core, the focus on on like the right things first, and each business can define what those right things are. But for me, I was getting stuck with a lot of like setting up a company, the website, and things that frankly didn't matter as much. I just needed to go out and talk to my customer base and say like, hey, companies, would you hire talent if I found them and vetted them and trained them? Would you hire them? Would you pay for them? Okay, great. Hey, talent, would you want to go to this school to see if sales was for you and build the confidence before going into the job, or you just want a job and say, I've done enough school by now? So I just was doing all of those things, and I just realized, like, oh my gosh, like this is so needed. And then it just became like the best thing I probably did was saying, okay, quit working on building a perfect start let's just say we're launching our first cohort on this date, and let's figure out a way to get people to go to it. And just work backwards from there. So I think there's a lot of accountability you can build in by getting those SMART goals sort of set early. And don't worry about all the other things that entail with that business. Peter Drucker says you have a business when you basically have a customer. Mm-hmm. And that feedback really resonated well for me during the early days of, again, solo founder, just trying to do a lot of things that go from an idea to having a business. So that was a huge lesson. The second is, I think the biggest thing is innovating when things are well and going well for you. I think a lot of innovation or a lot of change or happens for businesses or entrepreneurial, especially startup businesses, like when things might be like slowing down, you run into a wall, a global pandemic happens. The best times to actually innovate and improve what you're doing and really get excited, go sort of maybe at a different level of the experience, the customer experience, is when things are actually going really well. And that's sort of some wisdom that's been passed on to me from some people smarter than me. And that really rang true for me, because I think we missed a few opportunities there during the sort of 2018, 2019. We caught some really good momentum. And just as we were starting to innovate, COVID happened. Now, COVID also created a much larger market opportunity for us, because online certifications, online schooling, online training, pre-COVID is a tough sell for companies, for individuals, much different than it is today. We're seeing, just as we are seeing remote workforces, that actually training and enablement actually goes pretty well online. Like this whole Zoom thing, that Brian guy is actually pretty good in Zoom as well as in person. And so it's created some really good opportunities for us. But I think innovating sooner when things were running smoother is a lesson that I would 100% pass down to others.
Yeah, but I think it's kind of counterintuitive, right? Because most companies say, hey, things are going smooth. Why change what is working? Yeah, right. So that's just the common mindset. But I think there's some validity to that. And I think what happens is if you don't evolve and innovate, somebody else is doing that, right? And they're going to put you out of business. And I've heard Gary Vee talks about it, right? Gary Vee, I don't know if you listen to Gary Vee at all. He said you always need to wake up every night thinking like, hey, how can I put myself out of business and change my business model and think about a new way to either price my offering or position my company or deliver my services? Because if I'm not thinking that way, someone else is already doing that. And then before I know it, someone else have done it. That's every story you look at, right? Nobody in New York City knew that their taxi business was going to be completely eliminated by Uber, or how basically any of those, right? Amazon was going to shut down all the local stores that are carrying books. So I think that is an exact way to, the right way to look at it.
Similar to this too, like from a lesson perspective, or sort of fits into that innovation while times are good piece is, I've been fortunate to have some really smart people give me advice and help and be supportive throughout the past 5 years, mentor, advisor, board type of stuff. At the same token, and this could just be, this is maybe just be a first time founder fallacy here, but like, you sort of go into those conversations hoping they're going to tell you what to do, and you leave that conversation recognizing that the decision's still up to you. And I think that was, it sort of clicked a couple of years into starting the company, where I had some tougher decisions to make. And you go to the people who'd been there, done that, very smart, very accomplished, but the decision still came back to me. It never was, Brian, here's what you need to do, 100%, go start tomorrow. And I say that because, now when I go into those conversations, I'm prepared to make the decision. I'm just getting inputs. All I'm doing is using inputs to increase the probability my decision is going to work well. But I'm not going into those conversations sort of empty-handed saying, please tell me what to do. And that was a really critical learning, due to the speed of which, especially bootstrap companies, need to be able to operate and execute and change or optimize things, given we're resource strapped to begin with. And if I'm just looking for someone to tell me what to do and on that hunt and search, well, a lot of time could be wasted in that process. So that was another sort of key thing as well.
Which kind of good segue for my next question, which was like, do you have some sort of a decision-making framework that you follow, especially as the leader of the company?
Well, certainly depending on the area of the business, right? So CEO, you sort of oversee every function, and certain function of the business, sales, marketing, what have you, are going to be way more data and KPI driven from a decision-making process. And so, the benefit for me in, starting a company the first time is that I did kind of come up through the sales ranks And I understood already the importance of leveraging data and these trends and insights to help you make better decisions. So that's always certainly number one, is like, what is the data sort of saying or pointing to right now? Two is really staying in close contact from a customer perspective. Like, I will be on sales calls. I will be in the trainings. I will be talking to students. Like, I will be having in-depth conversations with them just to see if things aren't necessarily aligning from what we see in the data side of things. And the third thing is, I'm always, similar to sort of the Gary Vee sort of thought processes and decision making, I'm always questioning, are we improving fast enough? Are we getting better fast enough? Are we optimizing constantly what we do? I really want to make sure that we're making decisions that make significant strides in how the business operates. And so there's a level of, what's the net gain that this decision will sort of yield for us? And if it's not going to be that big of a net gain, maybe we need to focus somewhere else and not necessarily focus on this right now. Because think, and I just read Bob Iger's book, The Ride of a Lifetime. If you have more than 3 priorities, he says you have none. In startups, in smaller companies, and high growth companies, you have all these different things you want to do, et cetera. And I've made that mistake before. It's like, what are the 2 or 3 priorities we're doing? That's it. Mm-hmm. And that feeds into our decision making, or at least my decision making process and styles quite significantly.
But as the CEO, right? I mean, you have. It's kind of hard to narrow down your priorities when you have so many pressing things to focus on, right? You have hiring things you need to do. Maybe you have systems and process, and in your case, you probably have training program. You also need to focus on selling and marketing and all of those things. So how do we, as business leaders, kind of narrow down the priorities? And is the solution to narrowing your priorities finding critical new hires that you bring to the organization that you can share the priorities, so you can narrow down what you focus on?
Certainly, when you get to that point where everything's important, that's a great signal that says you have too much on your plate. And you need to start to actually think about hiring for these roles so that you can take those, this is very important, and make sure someone else has that on their plate as one of their 3 priorities. So that's when too much is important. That is always been my signal for, shoot, we need help. Okay. From like where I spend my time from a focus perspective, again, it's, we definitely use sort of a quarterly sort of call it the traction sort of framework for sort of how the operating playbook and model and so forth. But from a decision making process, it's just always like, what's the biggest bang for my buck right now? If I were to spend 20 hours on something, where does that 20 hours not just move the needle an inch, but move the needle 20 yards? And so it's that's the biggest question that it really comes down to, a level of sort of 80-20 rule, if you will, but leveraging the 80-20 rule from a maximum output perspective.
Mm-hmm. So obviously you talked a little bit about the decision-making criteria and what you do. And we talked a little bit about how it's important, right? Having maybe like 2 or 3 maximum priorities that you focus on, but at the end of the day, getting things done, right? Execution really comes down to, that's how you pay the bills. So, right. How do we, are there things that you do that are practical steps that you take to make sure that you get things done? Because, one of the things that I struggle with, you start a lot of things, but you just don't get around to finish things, right? And then there's like so many unfinished things because either you're going to make the excuse like, oh, I want it to be perfect, or you don't start it because I'm like, oh, I don't have time to start it, so I'm just going to put it off until I have the time. Neither of which helps you at the end of the day, right? So are there some practical steps or ideas that you have in terms of getting things done?
I've struggled with all those things. I've struggled all through the entire 5.5 years I've been around now. I've struggled with all those things. And I don't think I'm ready to write the book on how to overcome them just quite yet, Sam. But one of these days we can collaborate. We can co-author that. Number one is recognizing sort of like the relationship between sort of like perfect and everything else. Like, there is no perfect. And if you're seeking perfect, you're going to spend a lot of time and not have a lot of progress to show for it. So that level of perfection still haunts me a little bit, but I recognize that perfect is best formed when you actually put something out there, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, we teach this in our class, actually. Like, there's a study, like, class group, you're in a class making a pot of clay. One group had to spend all their time crafting the perfect pot. One group, make as many pots as you can and present at the end the best version of it. And the group that did as much, like 50 pots were produced in 2 days versus the one that just designed just one. That the group who produced a ton did way, 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 way better. So you get to that level of greatness when you actually get started. And I always reminding myself of that. Two is recognizing like what you can risk with that and what you can't risk with that. So that's just sort of has to play into it. But three is that's where your goals come into play. That's where your priorities come into play. And if you're getting distracted, if you're not on pace to achieve them because you're worried about doing things the right way, or you've all of a sudden, moved your target and said, we want to focus on these 5 things, that's where that accountability from the team comes into play. And you want to hire people who are really comfortable speaking up, especially at a startup. I mean, you need people who look at not just Brian's priorities as Brian's, but as the company's, and Sam's priorities as Sam's, no, but the company's priorities. You want that level of shared ownership to hold each other accountable. Nothing great is accomplished without that level of coaching, accountability, collaborativeness. And so not working in silos is a great way to help overcome that as well.
Yeah, and I've heard this phrase like the perfection is the enemy of progress, right? And I think that's a common pitfall that we all kind of naturally fall into. We want everything to be presentable. We want it to be perfect, the perfect sales deck or the perfect sales training program, whatever those things are. But obviously, holds you back from getting anything accomplished because you're just waiting for it to be perfect.
Especially as a founder, right? Everything's sort of your baby and it's got your name on it. And, for a while, that really was a cause for why I was slow to do things or not, a little trigger shy on some stuff and so forth. And so, there's a level of experience being a great teacher here that you recognize the downside of a lot of these sort of innate feelings about stuff. So that's but it's experience is a great teacher if you're willing to learn from it. So
most certainly. So obviously your entire business is around the teaching people how to sell better, teaching organizations how to improve their team members' performance better, right? And you have built a company around that. And obviously, as a starting company, you also had to think about marketing. So how has your approach on sales and marketing evolved over the years, and especially now that you are a founder?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one, let's start with sales, and I'll sort of separate the focus on marketing second. I always felt like I had a really good pulse on teaching sales, getting people, my old reps to do better, be more motivated, and so forth. But then you sort of see, and we're a big feeder on the tech sales side of things, and that's sort of how our curriculum is sort of wrapped from a competency perspective. And the tech sales, especially that SDR and BDR role, again, is so process oriented and it's so tech stack sort of supported at this point, which, we started at like mindset, sort of softer, universal sales skills and behaviors to much tighter prescriptive competencies for that BDR SDR role, at least from a training program and teaching perspective. Because, the reality is we want to teach our students what they need to know on the job their first 6 months, not what they need to know on the job 18 months down the line when they're an account executive and so forth. So one is just like the process orientation around it, making sure that, that is ingrained in people. And we eliminate this sort of, we can just show up and wing it and expect to do pretty well. Two, this is because I still sell a lot for our company. Two is sellers have to lead. And I think the consultative selling process and some of the other ways of sort of selling is they sort of take this follower mindset. Let me ask, you tell, and let me sort of show from there. But I'm a firm believer that we have to get sellers to be in control of that conversation and make it as easy as possible for people to understand what we offer and make it easy therefore to buy from us. And there's a level of ownership that we really focus on getting sellers to be sort of empowered with going into these meetings. How they set the tone from an agenda and outcome perspective, the way they ask questions, the way they're framing things up, the way they end those meetings. Like this can't be a 50-50 shared deal. It has to be 80% selling because our buyers are so, number one, busy today. our minds and attention spans are 5 other places in these meetings. And then 3 is, we're expecting you to be in control, because if you want to know something about my business, just look it up, the expectation of a seller in terms of how good they are and their effectiveness has significantly gone up. And we really want sellers to know that and push them to be better and constantly sort of work towards that. So that's sort of some of the things on the sales side for us. The marketing side, it's become just a content game, pumping out more relevant, differentiated content. It's, so much of it is just like the social and paid side of things is, at least from our business perspective, it gets really costly really, really quickly. So, finding some more grassroots sort of low cost sort of marketing efforts has been a real big key. We were pretty good at that early on, and there's times where we've struggled with it, but that's a key thing. But the biggest thing for marketing is, especially in our business, is the customer side of things. Like your customer is your best marketer. And so think about the student experience you create, the alumni experience you create, the hiring experience you create. Everything is experiential from how they experience your company and your brand. And that, when we spend money on that, we spend money on marketing, is the way we look at it. And that's gone on that's worked out really, really, really well for us.
Yeah, and I know during COVID, we've seen how the inside sales model really accelerated, right? The companies had to quickly adopt a model where they're able to empower the sales rep to actually work out of their home and still be able to continue to do their job without having to go door to door or whatever the sales methodology they follow, right? Especially those high touch sales organizations where they actually visited the customer's premise and showed them demos or whatnot, right? That had to immediately change. But then we also saw with the tech industry where they introduced this divide and conquer model with the SDR, opens the door, and then the AE makes the sale, and then there's that relationship model. So, where do you see this industry is evolving? Especially, I think in the sales, especially the software sales industry, that I think the SDR AE model will continue to evolve. But when the addressable market is smaller, and when you have fewer accounts to sell to, or you're selling more like a service to an end customer, how is this SDR AE model is going to evolve? Or do you think that model still works regardless of the size of the market that you're selling to?
Yeah, I think it works great still for companies that are for sales processes that are significantly more complex, longer, and essentially have a longer or more difficult prospecting cycle to things, right? So how many touches or how long it takes to actually get those meetings on the books, assuming that the majority of that outreach is going to happen from the inside, less conference, less face-to-face, et cetera, right? So I think that we're going to still see a big focus on that segmentation model for that situation or type of sell. 2 is we're going to continue to see sort of a greater level of segmentation across teams. And we did this a little bit at Groupon back in the day, and this is sort of what we teach in our curriculum is, even if it's smaller market, big market, we need to align our talent with the right segment. So, for example, like there's SMB, mid-market, and enterprise. So there's 3 sort of group teams, right, within that. But then I think we're going to start to see enterprise being sliced and diced even more, probably by industry, account, value or potential, and we're going to allocate certain sellers to that. So I think we're going to see a heavier focus on specialization within the segments that the market that the company goes after. Not necessarily changing the SDR AE model in that sense, but providing more focus and giving them more opportunity to become experts in that, because that's going to be the key thing. Is buyers want to deal with people who are truly smarter than them on this stuff. And if you give an enterprise rep, 20 accounts across, 5 different verticals, it's going to be tough for them to be that effective and dangerous. On the mid-market, SMB, sort of higher transactional, more service-oriented sell, I see us going back to the full cycle model. Still keeping hunter farmer, and for lack of a better term, but going back to full cycle. I've seen a lot of companies bring on SDRs when it really just doesn't make sense. And what's happening there, Sam, is we're missing out on the learnings that the AEs are getting in these meetings to now impact and improve the actual outbound prospecting approach, strategies, messaging, referral base that can sort of work and so forth. So I think we're going to see more full cycle AEs, that role becoming really, really more important for companies as well, because I think we tend to follow trends, right? And so the SDR AE model has been a huge, huge trend the past 5 years or so, and people are doing it because they think they need to do it that way. But I think we'll get more sophisticated. We'll get a little bit more knowledgeable what works, what doesn't work for that model, and see some change there. But I think the big thing to watch out for is how companies are organizing around specialization within the sales team, and recognizing the importance for their reps to be highly credible in the market at the SDR and the AE level.
Yeah. So when you talk about that, right, obviously when you're specializing and when you're also talking about the full cycle sales function, right, there's a lot of things that you need to keep in mind in terms of their comp structure, how much their, on target earning might be, or even how much in sales targets they could even pursue, because now they're doing both functions, right? They're doing the outreach, getting meetings, then conducting those meetings, getting them to opportunities, and then closing them all the way through, right? So that means they have less time actually just focusing on just closing deals. They're mostly having to also worry about filling their calendars with quality meetings, right? So what does that mean in terms of like is there any rule of thumbs in terms of how that changes, how much in quota that they should be carrying, or how their compensation structure should be changed or adjusted?
I think it will depend, but we have to recognize too that BDR SDR function is highly automated today. You throw outreach or a sales loft tool, or the HubSpot Salesforce CRMs will have something like that too, where that outbound prospecting and that cadence, it's all cadence based today, right? 15 touch cadence, 30, 45 days, what have you. And it'll tell you when to call. It'll tell you when to write that email. It'll have that reply email basically followed up. So if your segmentation and your sort of client profile targeting is really solid, you can actually get away with a lot more automation and be successful. So the AE isn't necessarily spending, like I had to do back in the day, 4 hours doing a cold call block each day. So the efficiency at which that BDR SDR model is being operated and driven now is going to allow that full cycle to, I don't think, have too big of an impact as it relates to productivity, quotas, et cetera. And again, by doing both the biz dev and the closing piece of the sales process, you'll build in a higher level of efficiency too, because you're talking to your customers. Your customers are your best coach. Oh wow, I keep hearing this is really important for this type of client. Interesting. Wow, that's funny. It's nowhere nowhere is that mentioned in my prospecting emails today. Let's change that. So you'll see some greater connectivity there, which I think is going to overall help. The same reason why sales and marketing and why SDRs and BDRs are even flowing into marketing right now is why that's becoming so closer, because the insights we're learning from our customers or prospects, et cetera, now feed into that top of the funnel awareness and education building. So I see a lot of positives in it, less about, oh gosh, I've now just given this person 50 more calls to make a day. It's so dependent on every company or sort of the market they're selling into for those types of things. And I think that's the biggest takeaway for these organizations, to recognize that, we can learn from other companies similar to us, but at the end of the day, like, look at your own internal data or trends or what your customers sort of buying experience is intended to be, and make sure you're devising your process accordingly.
So obviously, if a company is using Victory Lap to source their talent, who's gone through some rigorous training process on training on sales process and sales methodology and all of those things, right? That speeds up their ability to get to the sales function fast. But how much time is a realistic time from when you hire them to actually being able to produce positive ROI, right? Making sales. What is that? Do you have any sort of historical data that you've seen from having placed over 1,000 sales reps?
Yeah. So it will depend, right? Because 600 plus companies have hired from us. Every company is so different. Like, your ramp goal could be 30 days, another ramp goal could be 3 months. It might take another company 6 months. So it's difficult to really say this is the way it needs to be, just given the different sort of selling environments our grads go into and that just exist in the marketplace today. But there is a very clear difference of someone knowing how to conduct a 15 touch sequence over 27 days, incorporating multi-channel outreach with messaging that is powered by the psychology of communication and persuasion. Like
Mm-hmm.
that person should ramp faster. And that's what you get with Victory Lap,
Mm-hmm.
and they do, right? Versus welcome to sales. We think you have potential. You're a really personal interview. All right, now go sell. Like, so let's just be logical. That's going to be a different ramp time. So that's number one. Two is we have to think about, it's not always sales or the SDR or BDR that's the problem. What's the lead quality, right? How clear are we from a ideal customer profile perspective? What's marketing doing to sort of build brand and reputation in the marketplace? What technology stack do we have to help our reps be more efficient? What sort of coaching is happening within the first 30, 60, 90 days to get that person's confidence up or keep it up? So you look at those things, sales, and I tell this to our clients all the time, you can't just say, wow, love that person, great, solving all of our woes. At the AE, BDR, or management level, they need those other things in place. So you got to give a scorecard across those areas, and now that impacts ramp, okay? So yes, trained, educated person, ramp faster, right? Versus someone who thinks they want to be in sales. Two, but don't expect that just skill piece and knowledge piece to be the reason why they can ramp faster. Those other things need to be in place, like 1,000%.
I would love to have, I mean, we can talk for hours about these things, but I'm curious to learn a little bit about, obviously you've done a lot of training on leadership side of it as well. Are there any traits or characters that you look at, a person and say, hey, this person is got the leadership skills? Is there anything that you've seen as far as some sort of a character traits?
There's a couple of things that stand out. Number one is certainly your excitement, willingness, and ability to coach. As a manager, one of your core jobs is to improve the skill and output of your employee, and there's a huge coaching functionality there. Two, you have to be highly organized and therefore be able to prioritize effectively. As a manager, you now get 15% people's problems passed on to your plate, and then the people above you passing their problems down to you from a delegation perspective. So your ability to sort of process everything, stay organized, and sort of what I was getting at, choose and select the highest priorities and communicate upward or downward when you can't meet that deadline or commitment you may have said is absolutely key. The third is, this goes back to sort of like the Rosenthal theory, the Pygmalion theory, which is like belief. There's a factor of belief that managers have to have in their people. And the way, if you consistently believe that they can do this job well, and you don't show or think and give up on them, that will have a disproportionate effect on their performance. If you're like, Sam missed quota, and you start to get a little colder and colder and colder and less believing in that person, that will have a disproportionate negative effect on their performance. So it's an under sort of taught piece of leadership and management. But how you sort of display your belief towards your team goes a heck of a long way. The last thing is not avoiding confrontation and being comfortable with conflict. A lot of managers struggle with being able to tell someone that they're not doing well, and they delay until the problem gets too big to solve. So those are like the 3-4 that I try to coach, teach, and help companies understand that without these, not as much matters, right? The data, like I can teach you how to analyze a sales funnel and look at that funnel and point to for root cause problems for why performance might be low. But if you don't know how to coach, if you don't know how to have difficult conversations, if you don't know how to prevent that person missing quota 3 weeks in a row or 3 months in a row, and not have them feel like you're losing belief in them, if you don't know how to do those things, that other stuff doesn't matter as much anymore. So that's where a lot of the emphasis goes into it.
Yeah, I think the 1 Minute Manager book talks a little bit about that factor that you mentioned, kind of the redirects. I think they called it. So essentially, having faith in the person that you're doing the coaching, and then make them believe that they can change, as opposed to just saying, "Hey, man, you keep missing your quota. You have 3 more weeks to prove that you can do it, or you're out of here."
Yeah.
So, and it forces the person to just kind of quit already because they already quit in their mind.
Yeah.
So that's an important thing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And I think kind of, I don't remember the exact phrase, but I think the Patrick Lencioni talks about the humble, hungry, and coachable or something like that, right? So those are some leadership skills as well.
Yeah.
So obviously, as entrepreneurs, the one thing that we don't have enough of is time, and we have a whole lot of things to do. And we talked a little bit about having kind of the 3 priorities to focus on, right? So, are there any practical things that you have in terms of how you stay not just productive, like productivity hacks or anything that you use daily?
Well, we use Asana from like a tool perspective. That's been hugely helpful. Uh, Again, we sort of follow that traction operating playbook from like a meeting structure and sort of company structure perspective in terms of how we're tracking progress, those priorities, and communicating sort of what's working, what's not working, and so forth. So that's been a big help in terms of that. Second thing is I block off time in my calendar to make sure that I just have time to not be in front of my computer or phone and really sort of reassess on my whiteboard, like, all right, how am I doing? I think the hard thing about sort of being in a smaller, company that's trying to do a lot of big things is, that focus piece, and so the calendar block for sort of me time. Me time isn't like, go have a beer by myself, but like me time to really reflect on pace, progress, et cetera, has been super helpful.
Is that the meet time, and make time? Do you follow that? I've heard that as a strategy some people use.
Yep, it's just more so just sort of like making sure I'm reflecting. I think there's so much power in being able to sort of take a step back. So I focus more on that piece of the me time, but just taking a step back and just sort of surveying things. I think part of that is too just being grateful for where you're at, making sure you're celebrating and recognizing the progress you're making. Every day is not a doomsday, no matter what your feeling may be that at that time. But recognizing too that you're not making progress in certain areas and feeling like you have the focus and time to put into why and feeling better about what the change is going to be, right? So that's really the me time that I've been doing a lot more of lately. And it's been difficult because I'm such I really feed off that in-person energy, and I've always prided myself as a leader to be able to sort of pick up the pulse of the room and sort of lead by feel, if you will, and also lead by presence from a strength perspective. And so COVID has essentially said, okay, Brian, those 2 things in your playbook don't matter anymore because it's tough to feel that from a virtual perspective. So those other things, incorporating sort of the Asana and traction stuff have been a really big help.
So one final question. So knowing what you know today, what advice would you give your younger self?
Oh my gosh. That's a great question. I would, again, there's probably like 25 things I could say there, and the best advice is team. It's not about your strength as an entrepreneur. It's not about how good you are. It's not about how good of an idea you have. I truly believe at the end of the day, it matters about how effective and successful you are about surrounding yourself with the right people. So, in recognizing that it's not all on your shoulders, and the team is the key piece in the whole thing.
Awesome. Well, Brian, I certainly appreciate your time, and thanks for sharing some of your practical experience and advice with us.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam.
This episode of Coffee with Closers is brought to you by One IMS, a leading digital marketing agency helping businesses win new customers. To request a free marketing ROI audit, please visit oneims.com. If you enjoyed this video, please share it. To make sure you never miss an episode, please subscribe.